Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for coming to the first of what we intend to be several information sharing events. And with that, I will introduce my boss, your boss, Admiral John Lemmon.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? All right, I got this light here. It's good for seeing here, but it's kind of bad to see what's going on in the way back, but it's okay. Hey, good morning, and thank you everyone for being here. I see we have a pretty full crowd, and we still have some people trickling in, so that's okay. Hey, I'm going to be up here for a while. I've got this no engagement zone where I can't go past here because otherwise I'm going to start getting the camera in my face. But I'm going to be up here talking for a while, so if you need to get up and stretch your legs or do whatever, that's fine. Feel free. It's not going to offend me, but if you don't come back, it might offend me a little bit. So anyway, all right. So I'm going to see if I can work this clicker. Got it. That's what we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on MAO. But I know that's probably on everyone's mind, and I want to kind of get some information out there to y'all. And then, there's going to be additional information that's going to be coming out next week from headquarters, okay? So, like I said, I don't want to spend a lot of time there. I'm not going to read the rest of the agenda. The biggest thing is I want to talk about strategic and operational alignment, and then I want to talk a little bit about people and overall health and wellness and those kinds of things and looking out for each other, all right? All right, so again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because we're going to hear more next week, but I think it's important to kind of put some things in a little bit of context of why are we moving from a competency-aligned organization to a mission-aligned organization. And you've seen some of the communiques that have come out from Vice Admiral Peters and from Mr. Newton, and you've probably had some engagements with various individuals, probably a lot of rumors. We're gonna get through this, okay? This is all good. But the context here is, as many of you are probably aware, the current threat environment is marked by a great power competition, and we are part of that. The United States is part of that great power competition. All right? There's a lot of increased complexity out in the world. There are efforts to rapidly develop technology and then rapidly adopt that technology. We are part of also trying to do that and outpace our adversaries. As you also are probably well aware, we have had readiness challenges for a number of years. So we have not been meeting our mission-capable rates on our aircraft, and we need to do better. So that has kind of prompted this need for a really kind of a dramatic paradigm shift in the way we develop and deliver and sustain for naval aviation, okay? And there's going to be no change in our primary mission of capability development and sustainment. I mean, that's what we do. We provide a service to the fleet or whoever our customer is in the case of some other customers. But ultimately, the majority of everything we do is to support our sailors and Marines out there that are going to be using these capabilities. So capability development and sustainment are still our core mission areas. But we need to adopt kind of a new operating philosophy and reassess our organizational structure and our roles and relationships and reinforce the attributes and the behaviors both organizationally and individually, all right, that are going to enable us to more effectively achieve our mission. That's what we're looking for, all right? So in the end, it is all about a more highly responsive and fleet-focused global command. And NAVAIR, of course, is a global command. We support the fleet worldwide. And so what is the outcome we're looking for? We're looking for higher levels of readiness. We want to be meeting those readiness goals, those mission-capable numbers. Speed of delivery. The CNO has talked a lot about, hey, we're not getting capability out into the hands of the sailors fast enough, all right? So we want to increase our speed of getting capability out to the fleet. And then we want to have some sustained agility. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as well when I start talking about strategic and operational alignment. All right? So what we've been doing since about August is the NAVAIR commander sent out, and please feel free to come on in. There's all kinds of, there's some seats over here. You're not going to, you're not being rude or anything. Just pile on in. The NAVAIR commanders sent out the NAVAIR commander's intent, and then around that same time frame, we started looking at, okay, are we organized the best way? CAO's been around for quite a while now, over 2 decades, and so what are some ways to maybe become more mission aligned? And so we started kind of looking at some concepts of what that would look like. And then by about the fall and into the winter, we were looking at what are the attributes that we want to keep from a competency-aligned organization, and what are the attributes that we'd like to see, improved on when we come on the other side of a mission-aligned organization. And so we looked at those attributes. We did some benchmarking. What does industry do? How do they organize their headquarters, kind of C-suite type deals? And then we also went and looked at a number of different process vignettes. And one of the things that those vignettes exposed was the number of handoffs and the number of reviews and the number of checks in the processes that we have in place right now. Now, process is good, but we don't want to be so focused on process that we forget what the point of the process was, and that's to get something done, right? To deliver a product. So that exposed some of those areas. And it also kind of highlighted that, we've been, as an organization, being a lot of our workforce, a lot of priorities. This is a priority, this is a priority, this is a priority. Everything's a priority. Well, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority anymore, right? So what we want to see on the other side of MAO is how do we now take a look at those processes and make sure that we only have the steps in there where we need them, we only have the reviews where we need them, and we've empowered and delegated authorities to the commands as much as possible, NAWCAD, NAWCWD, and the FRC, okay? So that's kind of what the point of looking at those vignettes were. And you've seen some communiques along the way that have been coming out, and we've been getting feedback along the way. And in this entire process, we're going to roll out next week headquarters. You're going to see how headquarters is going to be structured and defined, what the kind of roles and functions of the various groups in the headquarters are going to be. And the idea is to get feedback, adapt, and then refine that as we go. So it's not going to be perfect, right? But I think the biggest thing is to keep communicating with everyone and let everyone know that we want your feedback. Hey, this isn't working very well. We said we were going to want to eliminate reviews, and it looks like we've added another layer, okay? We want to hear that so we can make it the best possible organization structure to facilitate accomplishing our mission as possible. That's what we're looking for. So next week, you're going to see some information on headquarters, and then the idea from there is going to be, after that, we are already in process in the commands of looking at, okay, what does this mean now for how we should best organize NAWCAD and NAWCWD and the FRCs. So that's kind of where we are right now, and about every 60 days, so around the June time frame, you can expect to start seeing, here's what kind of the new way we're going to kind of organize ourselves within NAWCAD is going to be, okay? So that's where we are right now, and then about every 60 days after that, there's going to be this kind of drumbeat that is going to say, okay, here's some more information about maybe some concept of operation of how these organizations are going to talk to each other, how we're going to form the teams, and that kind of thing. So that is kind of in a nutshell where we are right now with MAO, all right? And we'll have some time at the end here, I'm hoping, if I stay on my timeline, to be able to have some questions and answers at the end before we finish up at 9:30, which, by the way, there's another event coming in to start up at 10, so we are going to have to kind of be finished up right around 9:30. Everyone, please, there's other seats in here. You can make your way in and you know, find a place to get comfortable, because I'm going to be up here talking for a while. All right. So I mentioned already strategic and operational guidance and our understanding of that. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of discussions about this kind of thing. And I've always been really big on making sure that every person in an organization understands how what they're doing contributes to what the mission is. Otherwise, it just becomes a mundane task with no real purpose behind it. And I think that's problematic. And it doesn't make people feel like they're motivated and a contributor to what the mission is. So I'm going to talk about what we've been talking about in the Navy and as a Navy. And so about a month ago, I attended a 2-day, it was supposed to be 2.5, but the half day on the backside got weathered out a little bit. But every year there is this thing called NFOSIS. It's the Navy Flag Officers and SES Symposium or gathering or something like that. But basically, all the flag officers in the Navy come, all right, unless there's some compelling, you know, operational reason why they can't be there. And then most of the SESs, a lot of them. Now, they can't fit everybody usually in the venue, but every year they kind of try to rotate around who can attend. All right. So what we did during that was we talked about how do we get strategically and operational aligned as a Navy. And I will tell you that this was my first one attending. I was, you know, this is my first time as a flag officer going to this thing. So we had SECNAV there. CNO spoke, ASNRDA spoke, Admiral Aquilino from Pac Fleet was there, his staff was there, there were panels, and everything was about being strategically and operationally aligned and making sure that we didn't leave after those 2 days without understanding what we were doing as a Navy and why we were doing it and how we keep aligned with that. Okay, so a lot of a real palpable tone of urgency in every single discussion, except for the parts where we were talking about health and wellness. But and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the latter part of my discussion here. So when the CNO started off with this chart, there's a lot. I didn't make up hardly any of these charts. There's some in here that are mine from previous things that I've interwoven, but the CNO likes to start with this chart here. And so when you think about it, if you're a Navy person, you have to love this chart, right? Because this goes back to our very first president and our founding fathers, and he talks about the importance of the Navy, all right? So I think it's important for us to think about what it means to be an American, what it means to be part of a Navy, and how our connection in the Navy is so important with what it means for the importance of what that means for our nation, okay? So the Navy is the foundation, is part of the foundation of our nation, and what the nation stands for is very closely related to what the Navy stands for, okay? It speaks to what our value proposition is, as the CNO likes to say, all right? What is our contribution to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, okay? And all those things that were part of the foundation of our country in its establishment, okay? So just think about that and put that into the context of when you're coming into work every day, thinking about that a little bit. If you dwell on that chart for just a few minutes, you'll see the word decisive in there, okay? And I want to share with you kind of things that, like I said, the things that we've been talking about and that we should all be aware of with respect to how we as a Navy are striving to become more decisive, all right? And that's consistent with our national defense strategy and the great power competition that we're in and this environment where we need to be decisive in our actions. And so that's kind of the strategic environment that we're faced with right now. So in the context of strategic guidance, we kind of start with the national security strategy, right? that got updated, and it hadn't been updated in a while. Well, it was updated, which is good, because now that allows us to implement the National Defense Strategy. And then the National Defense Strategy will provide us basically, this is the problem we're trying to solve, right, in the military as a defense. And the VCNO at Infosys said that he believed, and others believe, that this National Defense Strategy now is the biggest flywheel in the reduction gearbox that is going to keep us all aligned. So if we understand what the National Defense Strategy is, now the forces can align to that and become more joint, and everybody's rowing in the same direction. So that's the idea there. Now, we then have the National Military Strategy, and then, of course, the Navy has a strategy that's part of that. The Navy strategy is basically what's our contribution to that joint force. That's a classified document. So this forum is unclassified. We won't be talking classified, but if you haven't seen that document and read it, I would encourage you to get a hold of it and read it. And I have it on my SIPR account. If somebody has a SIPR account and they want to email me, I don't check the SIPR every day, but if you let me know that you sent me something on SIPR, I can get that out to you, or you can ask, Ditch, Vice Commander, Captain Lee, or one of us, and we will try to make sure that you get that as soon as possible. The unclassed version of the Navy strategy is the CNO's Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority version 2.0, which came out in the last several months. And if you haven't read that, I would encourage you to read that as well, because a lot of what we're going to talk about today and everything that's in our commander's intent is aligned with our NAWCAD commander's intent is aligned with the CNO's Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority. Okay? And part of that then involves some concepts. And there's this concept for distributed maritime operations, which mostly focuses on the high level, the high-end fight, and I'm going to talk about that here in a couple slides. But things that feed into being able to assess how we're doing with getting to that distributed maritime operations concept and how effective it can be are things like large-scale exercise 2020. That's coming up, of course, in 2020. But in the meantime, what we have going on right now, NAWCAD is sponsoring and executing an advanced naval technical exercise. And these venues are set up to look at technologies and capabilities that we want to kind of test in a more technical and engineering environment rather than having the operational side looking at it as much. We are obviously always keeping the mission context in mind, but we need to look at how mature are these things, how effective are these things, what do we need to tweak, what do we need to improve on. That's going on right now. We're looking at things like, how's Minotaur doing, ocean harvest. We're looking at counter UAS activities and capabilities. We're looking at unmanned cargo to help with our logistics posture and that kind of thing. So those are all very instrumental in what this command is doing to support the things that are in the CNO's Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority. All right, there's kind of three themes from the Navy strategy, and I'm going to talk more about them in a next slide. But I want to let you know kind of what they are. We're going to be more agile. We need to be doing things that are mindful of being sustainable. And then there's this big emphasis on if we are going to be able to operate globally, of course we need to have good partnerships with our allies, and we need to be able to rely on them and leverage where they are in the world and how that can benefit and how they can help us as force multipliers from a capability and capacity standpoint. All right, this is a chart that we're going to spend a little time on this one. All right? This chart you will see in the CNO's Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority. So this is one of the ways that we've been sort of describing how we are articulating or understanding the environment that we're in, all right? This idea of a spectrum of rivalry or a spectrum of competition. Okay, so if you look to the left, you see day-to-day operations, low end, peaceful, and then things start to escalate, okay? All the way out to mobilization and then full out total war, all right? And those first two things in the bottom, restore agility and be sustainable, you saw those on the previous slide, right? And everything that are in those first two here about our responses is to be able to help us de-escalate on the terms that we want and not what our adversaries want. So that's kind of the point. So these are all things that we've been talking about as a Navy. And I want to share with you because these are things that the CNO wants us to be out and talking to all of our, everyone that we are teamed up with to make sure that everybody understands kind of this is where we're going, okay? And so when you come into work every day, you should be thinking about these things. What am I doing and how am I contributing to disrupting and making life hard for our adversaries? So a couple things need to make sure we understand about this environment that we're in and how we're going to adapt to it. The first is that this is a continuous spectrum, if you look at it. So for a while now, we've been out, we've trained, we've operated, and we've kind of been very linear in our approach, as the CNO likes to say. We've been phased. Hey, we're in phase 1, phase 2. We've optimized to this, we mass our forces, we go over to the Gulf, we do our thing over there, and then we come back, right? We optimized to that. In fact, we called it the Optimized Fleet Response Plan. So we optimized to being able to do that, and we got really good at it. But maybe that's not as relevant of a way to think about how we should be doing business in this environment of a global competition that we're in, this global power competition. And then there's this idea, there's this idea of continuity, okay? It's much less structured. There's more fluid here. There's more flow. You can move around in these different domains, okay? And so then there's also this idea of nonlinearity. And it's especially true if you look in the purple section there, information warfare, okay? The cyber war is real. We all know this, right? Things are happening in space as well. Those two areas were not necessarily part of the calculus back in the last great power competition that we were in, okay, coming out of the Cold War. I mean, these are now dominating, especially cyber. It dominates everything we're doing almost on a daily basis, pretty much. So think about that. And then there's this idea of simultaneity, okay? So what do we mean by that? Think about how we can be operating at the high end, and we probably are, and we just don't know in some cases. We could be operating at the high end, really aggressive, almost kind of in a total war state on the cyber front. And we can be, with our forces, operating on a day-to-day basis in a peaceful manner, right? So there's this idea that simultaneously we can be doing different things. And so think about that in terms of the intensity levels that you see kind of as they flow from left to right in that spectrum in the different domains. All right, and then the CNO has also articulated that at the lower end of the spectrum, as we've kind of come to understand it, that's primarily a challenge with our thinking and our conceptual way of how can we get better in here? So that's kind of why you see the double-headed arrow gray conceptual challenge. That's not necessarily where we're going to be challenged as much on the capability side, if that makes sense, right? We're going to have to think differently. We need to be more innovative to how we get better on this lower end of the spectrum here. So that's kind of the idea there. And just by how we've named it, the CNO said, hey, just by how we've named this, it kind of gives you an idea. We're actually struggling with, what do we call it? So it's actually, we call it the gray zone. It's like, what are we doing here? We're kind of even mentally challenged on how to put words to what do we need to be doing in this environment. So we need to do a better job there. But it's not really a resourcing issue. As you move further to the right, you'll see we have this capability challenge. All right? And that's where we need to maintain our superiority. Okay? This is where we are going to have those capability challenges. And that's why we need to really rely heavily on our investments in material and what we are going to bring into the fight. Right? So this is kind of how we're depicting the strategic environment right now in this great power competition that we're in. And so I wanted to share that with you all. And then now I kind of want to talk a little bit about, hey, so what does that mean? So how are we responding to this as a Navy? What are we doing? So we're kind of running our response along these kind of three themes here, all right? And the first two were captured, like I said, on the previous chart, and they support that last bullet of being able to de-escalate things on our own terms. And so this idea of agility there, restoring agility, there's kind of three aspects of that. All right? So, like I said, for a long time, we got really good at generating forces, moving over there, coming back. We lost our agility along the way. And so the CNO, and prior to that, SecDef Mattis, when he was the SecDef, said, hey, we're too predictable. We want to be strategically predictable, but we want to be more operationally unpredictable. So what does that mean? So we're thinking, okay. And so the CNO describes these three forms of agility. And the first one involves distributed maritime operations, right? Being physically dispersed, having a physically dispersed Navy that can mass its effect at a point in time that we choose. All right? That idea is basically to distribute our force and complicate the enemy's targeting on where our forces are. So it presents them a more difficult picture on which to operate and target. Okay? There's more seats in here. If anybody wants to come and sit down, feel free. Okay. But we want to be able to mass effects when we want to, right? That's the point. Okay, so we start talking about geographic agility, and this idea of how do we do that is related to the distributed maritime operations concept. And one of the fundamental things about distributed maritime operations and how we are going to see how effective that is the tactical grid. We need to be able to communicate when platforms are over the horizons, okay, from each other. We might as well be single ship out there if we're not going to be able to communicate. We need to be able to put out commander's intent, commander's guidance, and then allow the forces to go execute. And the idea is to be able to operate the carrier strike groups and the fleet commands as one unit. All right, so that's kind of the idea here. And this idea of dynamic force employment gets to the geographic agility as well. And so here's kind of basically what I basically summed it up as. Dynamic force employment. Our forces go and do things at unexpected times, at unexpected locations, doing unexpected things for unexpected periods of time. All right? That's operational agility. Not, we know they're going to the middle, into the Gulf. We're going to stay there for 5 months, 6 months, and then they're going to turn around and come back. That's not really, that's predictable. We've been doing that. And we're going to stop doing that. So that allows us to operate in a day-to-day manner that is more mindful that we are in a great power competition. Okay, so and a good example of that recently, if you've been keeping up with kind of what some of the strike groups have been doing, is the Harry S. Truman Strike Group. And they actually had the strike group commander at Infosys with some people from that staff that also briefed us on kind of what they did, where they went. Again, much of the things that we talked about were all classified, but suffice to say that the Harry S. Truman Strike Group went on deployment. They did go over into the Middle East, But then the next thing you know, they were back in Norfolk for like over 30 days. Well, what's going on with that? Right? Why did that happen? Well, that makes people scratch their heads and say, what's going on? They got a lot of good training done while they were there. They got some good maintenance taken care of on the ships. And then they went back out again. And they went back out into some areas like up in the North Atlantic where we haven't been operating much recently. And they did things that we kind of had to go back, as the CNO described, and blow the dust off of some of these things that we used to do a lot, but now have to relearn some of the lessons that we used to kind of just do on a normal basis. So that's the idea behind dynamic force employment. Continue with the strategic predictability. Everybody knows this is what we're doing and why we're doing it and where we're going, but operationally still be this elusive and dynamic and unpredictable, operate in an unpredictable manner that is more mindful of the power competition that we're in. So, and then we get into the technological response to agility. Okay, and that is where we get towards being superior at the high end of that spectrum. And so we can de-escalate on our terms like we talked about. So this is what the CNO really thinks right now is our Achilles heel. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we would all agree, right? We're not moving capability fast enough out into the hands of the fleet. And we need to do a better job of that. And that is our job. We provide a service. And so that's what the CNO is looking for. CNO likes to use the analogy of playing chess against Garry Kasparov. Any chess players out there? I'm not, great at chess by any stretch, but I know who that individual is, and I know he's a world-class chess master and all this. And so he says, hey, if I'm playing chess against this guy, he's going to beat me every time. But if I start taking, some of his if I take his rooks and I take his bishops, I maybe take a few of his pawns, eventually I'm going to take away enough of his stuff that I probably am going to be able to beat him now because he has no, right? I've dominated now the high end of the capability aspect with the things I can do. That's the analogy that he uses. And so what we don't want to do is, because, then people will say, well, we have better training, or our country, we aspire and value innovation, so we're going to be more innovative and all this. Well, true, but we don't want to rely on those margins. We want to go into a fight and we want to have the most unfair advantage possible. That is the goal. We don't want to have to get into a fight, but we want everyone else to know that if we're coming, we're bringing a big stick, okay? And you guys, our adversaries, need to understand that, okay? So now we can start talking about how we're going to de-escalate on the terms that we determine. So that is the idea. So, again, this urgency. How do we get capability out to the fleet faster? Always be thinking about that. Bring those ideas up. Then there's this idea of sustainability. And that captures that, hey, in this competition, this is going to be a long game, right? This isn't going to change tomorrow or next week or probably even next year. We're in this to win. And so we need to be mindful of our sustainability. And so how do we get ahead? How do we stay ahead? How do we know we're ahead, right? All those kinds of questions that we need to be asking ourselves and figuring out how to answer. So in terms of sustainable approaches, this is where the CNO says, hey, this is a readiness issue. We need to have our readiness where it needs to be so that we can be sustainable out there, all right? And be able, so that's replenishing the fleet, that's getting our readiness levels where they are, and that's gonna help us own the high end. So related to what we've been talking about, okay, be agile, think sustainably, and those are going to help us to be superior at the higher end, right? So we can move competition left where it's more sustainable. That's where we're more sustainable. That's where everyone's more sustainable. right? But we want to do that, and we want to bring it back to the left on our own terms, all right? We have to have superior capability to be able to do that. All right, so that's kind of how we've been approaching it. This is a quote out of the CNO's design for maintaining maritime superiority, the 2.0 version. We must pick up the pace. We can't be satisfied with achieving the minimum standards, okay? Being the best we can be every day, that's what we need to be focused on. All right, so I wanted to put that quote up there to just give you an idea. This is the kind of stuff that's in the document. All right, this also comes out of the document, out of the CNO's design. All right, these 4 center pillars are the 4 lines of effort that are talked about in the CNO's design and that we are aligned to as a command. All right, strengthening naval power at and from the sea, achieving high velocity outcomes. I'm not going to read them all to you. Undergirded there by these attributes of our organization and of our individuals. Having integrity, taking initiative, accountability, organizationally and individually. Holding ourselves accountable to ourselves, knowing this is what I should be doing today, right? And holding yourself accountable to that. So you are holding yourself accountable to the accomplishment of the mission. All right, those are important things that I think to think about. And then being tough. You know, this idea of dynamic force employment, that comes at a cost to the folks that are operational. When you think about my first deployment, when I got sent on deployment, that was during the first Gulf War. We surged 4 times to go, and then we were out for a couple, you know, we were headed out, and then they said, nope, come back. Go, come back. 4 times. I was single. It didn't bother me much, but a lot of people in the squadron that I was in were married, they had kids. You know, some other guys were single, they, you know, had to put their cars in long-term parking, you know, all this stuff, and there's so many things. Our sailors and Marines are so resilient, and they are tough, but part of helping them be that way is to make sure they don't have to worry about some of the things that they are worried about in a lot of cases, whether it's pay or housing or whatever it is. So that's part of our challenge, is to make sure that they have what they need so that they can focus on those alligators that are closest to canoe and be focused on the mission. All right, so this next slide gives you some specifics, again, out of the CNO's design, but I wanted to put them up here so you see that there are a number of things that are in each one of these lines of effort that the CNO is asking for the Navy to help contribute to, all right? And we are doing that. We are doing that as a command. So I think that's great. All right. Obviously, this is a critical time, right? And so I think this is a good time for everybody to kind of take a few minutes, 30 minutes, half an hour, 10 minutes, whatever you think. But really think a little bit and reflect and ask yourself, why are you doing this? What motivates you to get up in the morning and come to work every day? And hopefully it's more than just a paycheck. So I really think that only you can answer that for yourself. You know, what's motivating you to come in? Because there are rough days. There's bureaucracy that we deal with, although we're trying to get rid of some of that as we move into MAO. You know, hopefully it won't be, there's that Admiral, right? Hopefully it's not that. But if it is, I hope somebody would say, hey, did you mean to come across that way when you were in that meeting? Or, you know, that kind of thing. So I hope we have that kind of a relationship where I could get that kind of feedback. All right? So I think that it's important for everybody to kind of just think about that on their own. What is it that is motivating you? I'm going to share with you my own personal, a couple of personal things that have been part of my journey. all right? And kind of put that in a personal context that I'll share with all of you here today. And it kind of started when I was going through I was going through my DAU classes before I became program manager. And there's a lot of case studies in that course. And we're sitting in these little small group tables, and a lot of people at the table after we'd listen to a speaker or review a case study, and they'd be like looking at each other going, why are we doing this again? Kind of thing. And so it got me thinking about, I've done a lot of triathlons over the years. I've done every distance, and when I was getting ready to do my first Ironman distance race, one of the pro triathletes that we were listening to said, hey, when you're going to do this race, you need to know why you're doing it. Because when you're going to be out there, it's going to be hot, you're going to be tired, you're going to be hungry, you're thirsty, your bike's going to have a mechanical issue, your goggles might come off in the water and at the start because it's kind of a crazy atmosphere. You need to be able to dive down into that reason and say, nope, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to keep going. This is why I'm doing this. And I'm going to stay focused on my goal. Little setbacks here and there, but I'm going to keep going. All right? So it kind of got me thinking, you know what? I have some things that I know have motivated me when it comes to why I felt like I have had more to give wearing the uniform. And so the first one is my first deployment. July 8th, 1990-91, we were in the Eastern Med, and we were operating during the day. We took off, did my clearing turn off the CAT, and got the airplane cleaned up, and as soon as the airplane got cleaned up, we got a firelight. And it was on the right engine. I was a brand new nugget, didn't even have an aircraft commander qualification yet because I was still getting the hours I needed and getting all the training. And the guy in the right seat was the aircraft commander, very senior lieutenant. In fact, he left the squadron a few months into deployment. We got this firelight. Hey, we got a firelight. We start going through the procedures. We asked to climb early and all this stuff. So we start climbing out. We're looking for secondaries. We're getting ready to start executing the shutdown procedures. And we had been in the process asking in the E2, the only side of the airplane that the NFOs can see out of is the right side. On the left side, they're facing this way. That's where all the displays are and all the things that they operate to do the E2's mission. So they're telling us they see smoke. In the meantime, we're executing the shutdown procedures. And part of it is you secure fluid to the engine by pulling this thing we call a T-handle, but it's the fluid cutoff handle. It secures hydraulics and gas, fuel to the engine area, right? And then underneath that, there's this button you hit, and it discharges the fire extinguishing agent. Well, we did that, and the fire didn't go out. So I'm thinking, well, we're probably going to have to do a seat swap because he's going to want to be at the controls. Because I was in the left seat flying the airplane, and I was, obviously, like I said, brand new. I'm thinking he's going to want to do a seat swap, and then he'll bring the airplane to board. In the meantime, they're starting to talk to the boss about doing an emergency pull forward because there was a launch going on, and so all this stuff's going on. In the meantime, hey, the fire's spreading to like the wing, like chunks of the nacelle are coming off. We need to get out of this airplane. And I can't see anything because I'm on the left side of the airplane. And I'm thinking, holy crap. Next thing you know, we make the aircraft commander takes the recommendation. He's looking out there, and we go through the bailout procedures. Why am I telling you this story? We had a successful 5-man bailout. We all get rescued, lost the airplane. What happened? You get the mishap report, and here I am, a brand new. This is, of course, back in the paper message boards. I'm an old guy. So we're going through, and at the end of the mishap report, it starts talking about, for NAVAIR SysCom. For NAVAIR SysCom. One of the things was, for NAVAIR SysCom, develop and integrate an improved fire detection and warning system in the E2 and C2 platforms. In our community, we had been living with faulty fire warning lights for a long time. The reliability of systems is a big deal. It drives behaviors. We will still try to execute the mission in the fleet in spite of those issues unless it becomes a safety issue that someone decides to put their foot down about. But this is the kind of stuff that goes on and plays into decision making. And the lack of reliability of that system was a contributing factor. The aircraft commander that I mentioned had at least 7 faulty fire warning lights. Our community had, to the point of where our community had decided, hey, you get a fire warning light, if somebody's discharging the fire extinguishing agent on the deck, I mean, you had stories of maintenance officers and COs getting on pilots for doing that. Why'd you do that? You just ruined an engine. Well, because the procedures say to do that. Well, you knew it wasn't a fire. Well, how am I supposed to know it's not a fire? This is the kind of stuff we were dealing with. Not good. We don't want that, right? That's a reliability issue. All right, this next one is much more personal to me. My second deployment. We are in the Ionian getting ready to go into the Adriatic for some Bosnia support. And we had CQ'd the night before. I had done my CQ. This night, another CQ night, the weather was terrible. The weather was not the greatest the entire time, while we were in there doing our turnover with the Kennedy. But I think it was the first night. Yeah, it was the first night we were actually running some missions as well. I was asleep in my stateroom. It was a 6-man stateroom. The guy that slept above me was out flying, and the guy that slept next to me was also out flying. And we get this phone call in our stateroom. Hey, you got to come up to the ready room. What's going on? We lost an airplane. Okay. I'm looking at the flight schedule. I'm like, oh, Billy Ray, Bob's in there. Go up. They're out there looking for the airplane. Found pieces. Eventually lost 2 roommates, 5 guys in our squadron, lost an airplane. What happened? They waved off for a foul deck at night. The weather was bad. The pass before that, the commanding officer of the F-14 squadron took his own wave off because he had vertigo so bad. There was no visual horizon. There was no horizon at all. And because of the weather and how dark it was, people were getting vertigo. In the E2, the radar altimeter, if you're sitting in the cockpit, was down here. Okay? Your radar altimeter is kind of important to let you know how close you are to the water. And there was no audio cue. The only cueing was a light that would come on either full bright or it was off. There was no rheostat to dim that light. So what did a lot of guys do? They turned it off. Or I've seen people take a grease pen, a black grease pen, and they would try to darken out the lens cover because it was too bright for them. It didn't bother me. I always said it. It didn't bother me. Some guys didn't like it, so they did that. In the back, we had an altimeter that was graduated in increments much different than what the pilot and co-pilot have. All right? Somehow there was a breakdown in crew coordination and awareness, situational awareness, all these things that we talk about as air crew. But I think there's some contributing factors there of what was the cockpit design? How did the human factors play in what was going on? I don't know what. It still haunts me to this day. You can see the date. Yesterday was the 26th anniversary of that mishap. Okay? And I think about those guys all the time. And I still don't understand exactly what happened. We won't know exactly what was going on inside that airplane, but they flew into the water after the foul deck wave off. Okay? Tragic. And it was a tragic way for us to start our deployment. But it got me thinking as I went through test pilot school and became a test pilot that, all this stuff that we look at, it's a big deal. And our reporting on these deficiencies and correcting these things and the reliability of these things is so important that we need to make sure that we get it right. All right? So the next kind of time frame there is my first time out of the cockpit when I was at NavAir as an IPT lead, and I was like, I thought I knew how to do everything, right? I was a pilot. I'd done all this operational stuff. And then I started figuring out, man, this acquisition stuff is hard. I didn't understand the money like I thought I needed to. I didn't understand the contracts. And once I started getting my arms out, so I was very frustrated. I was like, grumpy going home, and I'm like, I don't understand what I'm doing, and this is, I want to just go back to flying and all this stuff. But it made me realize that, the fleet is counting on us. When you see airplanes flying and missiles coming off rails and ships sailing, there's so many things that happen before people see those videos or watch that happen. All the BFMs, all the comptrollers, the legal review that has to happen to make sure that we're in compliance with laws, the test planning that goes into that, the designs that go on with the engineering, the logistics aspects to make sure that we can sustain it all. It's a big deal. Soup to nuts, that's a huge responsibility that we have. And so we all play a role in that. And I said, the next time I hear some of these fleet guys out there bad-mouthing those guys at Pax River, I'm going to crack them upside the head because they don't know what they're talking about. And then I started thinking about it a little more. I'm like, they shouldn't have to worry about it. They should be a demanding customer, and they are. And Admiral Aquilino is a very demanding customer, and rightly so, and he should be. So, that's our job. Provide a service. Make sure we provide the highest level service possible. That's what we should be doing. And the further I think we are away from the fleet, I've always said this, the easier it is to lose sight of that. So if you need to take a trip to a fleet concentration area or go to one of the bases where we're flying out of to remind yourself of that, or just right here at Pax River, you can go see an airplane at VX-23 or HX-21 or TPS or VX-20. I did this with the teams in PMA 231. Really good relationship with VX-20. We were able to send people down there, hey, sit in the cockpit, take a look at it. Think about bringing this airplane aboard at night in bad weather. What would it be like? What would it be like if you were sitting in the back? What would you think about that? How would you think differently about what you do and your contribution? So I've always said the acquisition of capability and the sustainment of that capability is a weapon of war. We need to be thinking about it that way. All right? So this is the kind of stuff that is in our NAWCAD commander's intent. And it's all in line with the CNO's design. All right? So I'm not going to spend, a long time here talking about those things. I just want you to know that these things are in our NAWCAD commander's intent. If you haven't read it, please do so and realize that we are aligned. I'll go back to this quote from George Washington and just think a little bit here about, think, okay, here's what I'm doing and what my team is doing to improve our posture as a great power competitor. And here's what else I'd like to do, or here's what else we'd like to do as a team, but I need your help. I work for you guys. Ms. Taylor works for you guys, right? We work for you. If you can't figure out something or you need help getting something done and you are just running into a roadblock, don't churn on that forever and ever. Send us a note. Call us. Get on our calendar. Try to help. We want to help you figure this out. All right? Okay? We all work for our sailors and Marines. It's important to remember that. These next few charts, I'm going to kind of roll through these relatively quickly. These are themes that were captured out of Infosys, okay? This second bullet here, the nation is depending on us to apply resources quickly. Again, this idea of urgency that I told you was palpable in the tone the entire 2 days. ASNRDA used this analogy, which I thought was really good, Secretary Gertz. He said, hey, we need to start thinking more in terms of a soccer game versus a football game where the clock stops. In soccer, the clock's always running. The clock's always running, just like it is for us, okay? And there's a transition seamlessly between offense and defense, back and forth. That's how we need to be thinking about operating, not, time's out, okay, offense, you come on, now defense comes on. I like that analogy, so think about that a little bit. And then high-velocity outcomes. The CNO changed from version 1 to version 2. He changed it from high-velocity learning to high-velocity outcomes. The idea is we want to be focused on what are we trying to get done and what is the outcome of that. So, yeah, we want to learn. We want to continue to be a learning organization, but we need to be mindful of, hey, we got to produce, right? So ASNRDA asked us also to think about things like this, and he said, hey, we need to be more emphasizing and maximizing the upside of our value and opportunities space, and instead of focusing so much on the downside of risk, which I think a lot of us have communicated. We've become too risk averse. All right, so think about that as you go through your daily efforts, and what can we do differently. We had a lot of discussion about performance to plan. This is another thing that's been going on, and it's been characterized as performance to plan. So, create a plan. Is it a good plan? Are you on plan? If you're not on plan, what are you going to do to get back on plan, right? That's the kind of stuff that those are kind of Mr. Stackley's big things all the time that I remember. We'd go to brief him. But the idea is, hey, we want to also be accelerating our learning, right, as we execute. As we're focused on those outcomes, we may fail a couple times, but, we got to stay focused on the mission, and that's okay if we fail as long as we're learning and still driving to the outcomes. ASNRDA, another thing he said, hey, if we're both getting to the same place, but I'm getting there faster than you, even though I failed 4 times and on the 5th time I made it before you did, I still win, right? So we can take some risks. We don't want to compromise safety, but we can take some risks, and that's okay as long as we're learning and redoubling our efforts to get better the next time. All right? SecNav said, if you look at that second bullet, he said, hey, we need to make sure we're looking outside of our own world, right? Other organizations have solved some of these problems that we're dealing with, and the idea of doing a reliability control board and how we're doing that, that's an industry best practice from the airlines. And that's what we've instituted. Got it. So this idea of everybody getting on the same page, using data, single source of truth, to drive our focus on the degraders that are out there on these various type model series, so that everybody's rowing to get to the root cause and solve the problem permanently. And that's the effort that we're on. So we're using data and analytics. It kind of flows into the last bullet there of how we're using data to make our decisions, drive our decision making, and also to eventually, hopefully, become more predictive. So when we have a WRA or some kind of a system, a subsystem on a platform, and we've been monitoring that now, and we know that typically this thing is going to fail at about 1,500 hours. Well, at 1,400 and something hours, pretty close to 1,500, if it's getting ready to go do another sortie, we should probably pull that box, right? We do the opposite. We will fly until it fails, and then we'll be like, well, now we got to order a new one, and blah. Well, now we've lost a sortie. So if we can be better and more predictive, we can keep more aircraft in a mission-capable status for longer periods of time. All right, these are more my slides, or this is more my slide here. And I just wanted to emphasize the fact that, hey, we need to always be learning. And I hope that you feel that we are. And if we aren't, then we need to do a better job, right? And so give feedback on how we could do that. This idea of a dynamic organization, this gets to kind of what we talked about with the fleet, becoming more dynamic. We should be thinking that way as well in terms of how we form our teams. And that's kind of one of the things that we're looking at as far as, what are we going to look like when we come out on the other side of a mission-aligned organization. All right? And being open and honest with good and bad news, being transparent, I think those are important things to think about. A lot of times you'll see core values in organizations and it's like, yep, they're on this nice chart and everything like that, but are they really acting that way? That's where the proof is in the pudding. Are we living those on a daily basis through our actions? And are we, acting with integrity, and are we being truthful and not trying to, are we being transparent? Okay? I thought this next slide was a good visual of some of that. I've always been big on culture and climate, and in an organization, a command. The kind of intersection there in the center is kind of where I see these things, culture and climate are kind of like the foundation of a house. If it's not right, you're gonna have cracks, and bad things are gonna happen structurally. So we got to have a right balance of product versus process. I talked about that earlier. Attitudes versus policy, and not being spring-loaded to know. Not saying, hey, that's not my job. Well, maybe it is. Or if nobody else is going to do it, put the pack on and own it, right? Move out. That's what I say. Ever since I was young, first in the fleet, I used to hate listening to, well, that's the way we've always done it. That's lazy. That shows no critical thought. So if we've always done it that way, and we've thought about it again, and it still makes sense to do it that way because we actually put some critical thinking into it, that's a different story. But if we just, take it for face value that this is still the best way to do it because we've always done it this way and we haven't even thought about it again, that's lazy. And so we need to not be doing that. Maybe I could have put velocity instead of speed because velocity has a vector to it. Make sure we're going the right way because we don't want to be running really fast in the wrong direction. But anyway, so you get the idea though. This idea that we are supposed to be all working together, all right? Some other themes, people in leadership. I believe everyone's a leader. Doesn't matter where you sit in an organizational structure, you should be leading, taking the initiative, all right? Know what your skills are, know what your responsibilities are, hold yourself accountable to those things, and take charge and move out and own it, right? SecNav said, hey, we can't be doing things business as usual anymore. A lot of his emails, he says he signs, instead of like very respectfully or best or something, he says urgently, Richard, right? I don't call him Richard, but he calls himself Richard because that's his name. Anyway, all right. I said the first thing already. Here's another thing I've always said. We all have choices. Some things we don't have choices about, but we have choices about those things. How energetic are we going to be? How enthusiastic? How optimistic? What's our attitude? Those are our own choices. That's a choice every day. You can let something get you down, or you can let it roll off your back. And hey, I'll be the first to admit, I struggle with those things sometimes. My personality is one that I pretty much, you see what you get. What you see is what you get. And if something's bugging me, Probably somebody's going to pick up on that. That's okay, right? If as long as I don't let it impact the effectiveness of our mission. So anyway, I think those are force multipliers. They're important. Be mindful of them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. All right, this last one, another theme out of Infosys. A lot of things going on with urgency, right? I've mentioned that. We need to take care of each other, though. All right, it's important. We need to be mindful of what's going on with our teammates, with ourselves. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. But I wanted to end with the quote again. Because if we're doing all these things, in the end, you know, what we bring is honorable and glorious. And I think that it's important to think about, you know, how we contribute to that. So I guess George Washington looks a little green there. Maybe thinks I'm talking too long. All right. More seriously now. I mentioned urgency, and with urgency comes pressure. Okay? It's just a fact. And with pressure comes stress. And you know, there's some pretty recognizable faces on this chart. Okay? And they've, you know, taken some drastic actions. And nothing is worth that. All right? No one's immune, though, obviously. So, think about that. And sometimes all it takes is just asking somebody, hey, how are you doing today? Because you seem like you're a little distracted. Is everything okay? Just knowing that someone, even if they don't want to talk, just knowing that someone has offered them an ear to listen to them and to be able to just say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I got a few things on my mind. I really could use a few hours to go take care of whatever it is, right? Because I'm stressed out right now. I've got this situation with my house or my car, my kids, my aging parent, whatever it is. You know, not everything is all about work, okay? So just think about that individually, reflect a little bit, and think, hey, am I taking care of myself? Am I taking care of my family? Ever since I've first started, you know, sort of, you know, counseling, mentoring, talking to sailors, other officers, I always say, when we're talking any kind of career issues, first thing you need to do is think about what's best for you and your family. The very first thing, that's what you need to be thinking about. All this other stuff is great. I mean, I almost got out when I was a lieutenant because we were starting a family. I wasn't sure I wanted to raise a family in the Navy. My wife said, do you still like what you're doing? I loved what I was doing. Then keep doing it. We'll make it work. Okay, got it. And you know, that's helpful, right? That's supportive. If you have a problem there, that it might not be the best thing for you and your family, right? So think about that a little bit, and that's kind of the theme on this next slide. It's a marathon. We're in this for the long haul, and so like we're talking about being sustainable with our forces and how we operate them and the things that we're mindful of, we also be needing to do that as an organization, individually, and with each other, I think. So think about that as well. This next chart, I think, is just a good little kind of shows a lot of the connections there in that regard. All right? It's important that we're mindful of them, I think, assess them, nurture them, both individually and as a team, kind of like I talked about before. And that team aspect kind of ties in with that green puzzle piece over there on the side, your social support network, your network of support within the office or within the command that you're in. Those are all important things. And so, everybody's does this kind of stuff, I think, differently, maybe a little bit more individually. I've been on this journey of self-reflection and trying to grow as a person and figure out, how did I handle that situation? I probably didn't handle it very well. I need to do better next time. That kind of thing. Going back and, hey, I'm sorry I raised my voice, or I'm sorry I didn't listen to you as attentively as I should have. I was distracted with this other thing. And so I apologize for that. You know, whatever it is, just those kinds of things can go a long way to building relationships that are so important to getting things done. And so, you know, there's physical aspects of this as well. And we're going to touch on some of this stuff here. So there's a lot of stressors out there. A lot of them come from work, if you let them. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, you know, I came into this job in September, and I think I jumped on the treadmill. It was at incline 10, and it was on full speed. And that's just the way it is. But, you know, I've had a lot of great support from our team. And I've seen just incredible amounts of initiative that are being taken. And so that allows me to know, hey, now I'm not a big micromanager. I just had this thing called a Hogan's Assessment done where it's kind of like an MBTI, but it's like an MBTI on souped up steroids and things, all kinds of questions you answer, and then they kind of say, here's who you are, right? And I was like, wow, that's actually pretty, you know, the word intense came up a few times in the debrief. But one of the other things that came out of it was, I was like, hey, this is kind of, yeah, this is exactly how I try to operate. You expect people to behave like adults, you expect them to know their business, and you expect them to get their job done, and you don't micromanage. I was like, yeah, that's pretty much, that's kind of way I hope I operate. Now, if I'm not doing that, I'd like to know about it. But it was very insightful. And so, you know, think about that a little bit with kind of your maybe experience with MBTI, how you're interacting with your teammates, what that means for you. I did not realize how draining it was for me. My personality type is I'm an I on the end. I'm an introvert. That means I basically don't draw energy from things like this. But it doesn't mean I can't do them. It just means I'm going to be tired tonight. Okay? And I had to figure out how to recharge my battery in another way. And that means a lot of times for me, it means I need to have some quiet time. I need to be by myself. I need to go, you know, go on a bike ride, or I need to spend time working out just by myself with my headphones on, or reading, something. I didn't really fully comprehend that about myself until I was a CO as an 05. I knew how I acted, but I didn't really understand why I was acting that way, or, you know, how that was impacting people around me, like my family and things like that. And so I said, wow, I'm leaving the squadron every day, and I'm freaking drained. What is going on with me? I need some decompression time. And, you know, our kids were young. I'm running home. I'm taking one to soccer or one to guitar and all this other drum lessons. And, whew, you know, by 9 o'clock at night, I'm like, you know, I was just around people all day long, and it was draining for me. If you're that way, realize that. You know, some people thrive on that kind of thing, and that's great too. But you need to, I think, kind of understand how you need to do something that allows you to be most effective, right? And then get that support network that you need. You know, just have the conversation. Hey, look, I need about 15 minutes. I've had to do this a couple times in the office since I've been here. I'm like, hey, I can't bounce from one thing to another. I feel like my head's going to explode. I need some time to, how did that meeting go? What are some things I need to follow up on? You know, instead of waiting until the end of the day when everything is just like, oh, I don't even feel like doing this anymore, right? So be aware of those things. So a lot of things in the work environment that can stress us out. There's also, of course, all the personal things that can happen. I mentioned a few of them: car, house, kids, parents, whatever it is. There's a lot of things that can happen that are going to cause you, you know, some stressors. Now, how do we deal with those things, all right? Well, we hopefully they're not destructive. We don't want to have destructive things going on, right? Especially, you know, no substance abuse. I mean, that people, they do that, right? And then, you know, the top one. I mean, working so hard all the time, you become burned out, right? Have the outlet. Know when you need to take the outlet. Talk to other people. Hey, I'm feeling really stressed out right now. Are you feeling this way? You know, whatever. Don't neglect your health care. Go see the doctor. Don't neglect that nagging injury that you have. Get it looked at. Take care of yourself. All right? Don't be self-sabotaging, you know. And you know, fitness neglect, I mean, that's another one. I've seen some pretty creative things going on. Like in 2272, people do walks, stairs, put on their sneakers and go, you know, arcing around the building a few times during their lunch break. In the Pentagon, it was the same way when I was up there. I'd see people, you know, doing their speed walking, and they have a great gym there, but they just wanted to go do their thing, you know, walking around. That's fine. Whatever, you know, but usually they'd be with somebody. It's like, hey, their friend that they were having a nice social conversation with, but they'd be, you know, moving out, walking through the Pentagon, and things like that. So there's creative things you can do. You know, I had a pull-up bar in my office. I took it out because I brought it home with me. Then I'm going to probably bring it back, you know. Stretch bands, I mean, you can put those on doorknobs. Whatever, you know, whatever you think about, you could probably do it and figure out how to do it. All right? But I think it's important that you at least consider it. All right, this next one. So kind of some of the things we've been talking about, right? How do we manage our stress? If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. How do I triage, right? How do I triage my list of to-dos? Prioritize and execute, right? So we all want to be defaulting to aggressive, right? Defaulting to aggressive of getting things done, but we got to be making sure we're getting the right things done in the right order. All right? So think about, and if you're confused, maybe you should ask somebody, hey, I'm working on this. Does this make sense? This is what I'm working on today. Or this is the project that I'm going to work on to have done by, you know, next week or 2 weeks from now. And then be committed to your own well-being, right? Don't let the system roll you over, because it will. You're in the end where the people matter most. Words and actions happen are at the command level, and maybe not even at this big of a command level, right? Because this is a big command. But within your unit, within your particular office, that's where those things really come to fruition or not. And they should be if they're not. So what can you do to try to help improve that if it's not happening? All right? And then, you know, this change aspect, maybe you look at it more as a challenge instead of a stressor. Just how you think about things can change your attitude towards it. You know, hey, we're moving from CAO to MAO. Good. Do it. All right? Let's do it. I'm in. What do we need to do? All right? We're doing this. How can you help? All right? Feedback, ideas, help to adapt and change things for the better. That's what we're looking for. And then that last one there, looking for, you know, hey, if you need help, ask for it. We talked about this during Infosys. There was a doctor that came and spoke and said, hey, he had a new 1-star, called and said, hey, I'm not hearing anything anybody's telling me. I'm so overwhelmed. And she said, all right, let's talk about it. You know, they kind of came up with a plan, and she said, you know, hey, why did you feel like you could call me? A lot of people, they don't want to make that phone call. They don't want to, you know, ask for help. And he said, the mission is too important for me to be the reason it fails. So there's a different way to think about, you know, the idea of asking for help if you need it. So ask for help if you need it. I went too far. Okay. This is just kind of, I thought, a cool little rubric, memory aid to think about how to stay balanced, earns, you know, exercising, attending, getting your health, maintenance, PHA stuff, all those things that you see listed there. I just thought it was a good little memory aid that you might want to consider thinking about and seeing how it kind of fits with that puzzle piece, those puzzle pieces that I showed earlier. And then this idea of being tough and resilient. You know, don't beat yourself up. That's another thing that came out in my assessment. It said, you know, this tells me you don't need anybody to give you feedback. You already are going to be your own worst critic. You'll beat yourself up, and so don't flog yourself so hard, right? It's like, well, that's good. Yeah, I probably needed to hear that. I need to know, hey, okay, don't be so critical of myself. If I did something wrong, okay, what can I do better next time? And then make the improvement. So, you know, think about these things on here, how they can help you become more resilient, and how you can foster that atmosphere in your and that climate in your work environment. All right. And then finally, last slide. You guys are probably like, thank God. This is kind of the CNO's description statement of what he views his job as. Okay? A Navy, when finished, is worth more than it cost. And that should be, I think, our deal with the American people as well. So we want to have a Navy that is the safest place for our sailors, and that we're the best partners. We're the best partner for our allies, and that we are the worst nightmare for our adversaries. Okay? Be the best we can be, and be the worst nightmare for our adversaries. That's what we should be doing. So, thank you all very much for being here today and spending time this morning. I thank you all for what you do, and please be passionate, be committed, care about what you're doing. And if we have some time, I think we have some time now, about 5 minutes or so. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Yes, sir.
Because you know, there's a lot of baby boomers that are retiring. You know, there's this bathtub curve issue, and I want to ask you about a lot of people who've spent years here. Retirement is the next chapter for a lot of us. There's something out there called a phased retirement plan that I know the Navy, big Navy, hasn't grabbed onto. Do you know if other people have looked at that so that we can still provide service, but then we can go on to the next chapter of retirement? Can you talk about that?
You're saying you've heard of the phased retirement plan in, like, out in commercial, in industry?
DOD's looking at it, but
okay.
no service has really stepped up and said, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
Have you?
So
have you
obviously, by my question back to you, you probably already know I don't know.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that there isn't something. I don't know if Leslie, did you happen to hear that question? Okay. So the question has to do, because I don't know the answer, but that doesn't mean that there isn't somebody that does. It has to do with the idea of a phased retirement plan. And is the Navy looking at, apparently DOD is looking at a phased retirement plan for, the workforce, and I'm not knowledgeable on that topic. Okay. Yep. So what Graham said is that it apparently is available in some government organizations, but it is not yet available within the Department of Defense. Correct? Okay. Okay. So I guess they're looking at ways that it could be implemented, but it hasn't been fully baked yet, I guess. So, anybody else? That was a hard one, but it was easy because I didn't know, and I could just say I don't know.
Hi. Good morning. I'm a change agent for MAO, and one of the feedbacks I keep getting is for the past 26 years we've been competency aligned, and how are we going to be bucketed going forward, like 4.4, 6.8, 1.0, et cetera? Has that been determined or not yet?
Right. So, and I guess it kind of, let me see if I can answer this a couple ways. One is we are going to kind of, we're going to get away from the word competency. Obviously, we're not going to be competency aligned. It's going to be mission aligned. And part of eventually what's going to have to happen is from a, how are you coded or billing your time and those kinds of things. I think that's going to take a little bit of time. So for the immediate future, and as we roll this out and figure out how it's going to be, how people's, how they're going to bill their time and all that stuff gets laid flat, then those codes will still be around. But it doesn't mean, in other words, okay, so let me see if I can help answer it this way too. So how do people normally identify themselves right now? They say, I am John Lemmon, I'm a 433, structures guy in, that's it. It's like, well, how about if we said, I'm John Lemmon, I'm a structures engineer in NAWCAD, and I support PMA 265 and PMA 231. Now we're wearing the uniform of the team that we're supporting. We're not identifying, the idea is that we're trying to get people to be more focused on the mission. So the next week when you see the headquarters rollout, you will see how headquarters functions are grouped, and then the challenge next is going to be, what does that mean then for the rest of the organizations that are performing those functions, artists formerly known as competencies kind of thing, right? Does that answer your question? Because I want to make sure I've gotten to the answer of what you were asking. Yes? Okay. All right. Anyone else? Sir, I think it's sir. Oh, I can't see that far. Sorry.
Never needed
I got to put my glasses on because I see someone got up, but I can't tell who. Okay.
That
there
was
we go.
on purpose, sir.
How you doing?
Good morning, sir. Understanding the Navy's strategy as it's supporting the national defense strategy, are we expecting any type of revision in appropriations law to support our ability to operate on that continuum?
Yeah, that's good. So I will tell you, this is something that we've been, since I first day got here, is trying to figure out how we can better educate our entire workforce, especially the program managers, on what are all the levers that they have that they can pull. Because I was a program manager, and I will tell you, after then going up and serving as the, working up in ASNRDA as the EA for Mr. Stackley and Mr. Gertz, I just was like, there are a lot of things that Congress puts into the NDAA every year. But a lot of those things I don't think are filtering their way down into the execution of, oh, this is how I can use this, and this is how I can use this. And so my idea is there's this highway that leads to capability delivery. And that capability delivery started with, I know what the problem is I'm trying to solve, and here are all the different ways I can get onto that highway, right, to be able to solve that problem. There are some non-FAR-based ways of getting onto that highway. There are some FAR-based ways of getting onto that highway. We do a really good job, I think, at the higher classification levels of having the catcher's mitt in the program office to integrate the capability when they're classified. We don't do, I don't think, as well on the unclassified side, where it's easier even to communicate, but for some reason, there's this disconnect, I think, between knowing what's being worked on, where it can be applied, in what platforms or weapon systems, and then are the resource sponsors tied in with that as well so that they can fund into the programs of record to get that integration to happen when it's at the right technology readiness level. And that, I think, is where we need to kind of tighten up and do a better job. Because I think in a lot of cases, Congress will say, hey, we're giving you all these authorities. We're giving you these things. What are you doing with them, right? And so that's where then on our end we go, well, I didn't realize I could use it that way. Or we've implemented some policy that puts a meter on that, what the intention was. Unintentionally, of course, but it ends up happening that way. That's the manifestation. So all good points. I don't have, this is exactly how we're doing it, but I can tell you that Congress has been, over the last several years especially, been very leaning forward with pushing authorities into the NDAA language. Would you guys agree with that? Okay. Oh, I want to make sure I'm not saying something that doesn't make sense here.
Well, Admiral, sadly, my job now is to be the hook.
Oh, okay. I was wondering where that voice...
Where's that coming from?
I was wondering where that voice was coming from.
So thank you all very much for coming. It is NAWCAD leadership's intention to host these monthly. Now, the Admiral's going to have to go to some training, but we will meet. We will talk about what we know about MAO, and we want to continue the dialogue between the workforce and leadership, and it's one of my jobs, so I have to make sure that happens. If you found this helpful, understand that it's going to be recorded. It is being recorded, and it will be available. We'll talk about how to find it and steer other people towards it if this helped answer your questions. If it didn't, if this was a waste of your time, tell me, and we'll make the next one better. All right, thank you all very much, and we'll see you next month.
Hey, have a great rest of the week. Thank you.